The camera lingers on wind-scoured red clay ridges under a bruised sky. Pine needles whisper across the ground like secrets that refuse to stay buried. This is northern Georgia in the fading light of the 18th century, a wild, unforgiving edge of the American frontier, where survival was never guaranteed and grudges never died quiet deaths. This soil remembers. It still carries the faint iron tang of old blood if you know where to dig. In the fall of 1780, that soil drank deep. Colonel John Dooley was slaughtered in the doorway of his own log cabin, not in the smoke and glory of battle, but at home, where a man should have been safest. His wife and children were forced to watch as a band of vengeful Tories broke in under cover of darkness. Muskets cracked, blades flashed. Accounts differ on the exact horrors. Some say he was shot down while pleading, others that the killing was slower, more deliberate. But every version agrees on one thing. This was no ordinary casualty of war. It was a message, a brutal personal strike in a civil conflict tearing neighbor from neighbor. Dooley had become more than a militia colonel. He was a symbol, the fiery leader who helped turn the tide at Kettle Creek, the relentless prosecutor of loyalists, the man who refused to bend. His death sent shockwaves through the backcountry settlements, and from that single act of violence rose a collective scream that echoed across Georgia's hills and hollows, a raw, unrelenting cry for vengeance. What followed was no tidy chapter in a history book. It was frontier justice at its most primal, a manhunt, a remote pond, ropes creaking in the night, and a cycle of blood that helped define the savage heart of Georgia's revolutionary struggle. This is the story of how one man's murder ignited a fire that would not be quenched until the score was settled in full. To understand why Dooley's death unleashed such fury, you have to step into the world that forged him. Georgia in the 1770s was no polished plantation society. It was raw frontier, a jagged edge where Virginians and Carolinians drifted south chasing cheap land after the French and Indian War. Royal Governor Ryle Wright viewed these newcomers with open contempt, calling them crackers, rough, law-skirting men constantly clashing with Creek and Cherokee nations over stolen horses, broken promises, and pure opportunism. They cleared pine barrens, raised log cabins, and formed militias as much for daily survival as for any political cause. John Dooley arrived in this volatile mix from Virginia, part of that restless tide. No portraits of him survive from his lifetime. Only later artists imagined a stern face beneath a tricorn. He was ambitious, sharp-tongued, and flexible when circumstances demanded. Early in the Troubles, like many pragmatists, he leaned loyalist. The crown promised stability, trade, and protection from Indian raids. But allegiances shifted quickly. By the mid-1770s, Patriot sentiment swept the backcountry, driven by taxes, restrictions, and the heady promise of self-rule. Dooley switched sides. Some called it principle, others saw calculation. Either way, he rose rapidly in the Wilkes County militia, a sprawling district carved from recently ceded Indian lands that stretched from Augusta deep into territories that would later split into multiple counties. His brother's death hardened him further. Thomas Dooley fell in a skirmish near the Oconee River in 1777, badly wounded in a clash over horses or hunting rights. Frontier disputes often blurred together. Abandoned by his own men, Thomas suffered terribly. John, consumed by grief and rage, sought blood from the Creek warriors involved. He seized captives and pushed for harsh reprisals. Authorities in Savannah checked him with a court-martial. He resigned one commission, but re-emerged as colonel of the local militia, directing his fire into the Patriot effort. Kettle Creek in February 1779 sealed his reputation. A Patriot force of roughly 340 men, led by South Carolina's Pickens, with Dooley and Clark commanding Georgia contingents, surprised a larger Loyalist column under Colonel James Boyd. The Loyalists camped along the creek, confident in their numbers and British backing. At dawn, the Patriots attacked from the ridges. The fighting was intimate and vicious, musket fire ripping through trees, men grappling in the mud, blades flashing. Boyd fell mortally wounded. The Loyalists broke and scattered into the woods. It stood as one of the few significant Patriot victories in the South during a bleak period when Savannah had already fallen and British control seemed unstoppable. Dooley led his regiment with the fury of personal vendetta. He fought not only for independence, but to settle scores, in a land where every score ran generations deep.
Yet Kettle Creek did not calm Georgia. It inflamed the conflict. This was not a clean war of neat battle lines. It was neighbor against neighbor, a savage civil war layered over the larger revolution. Loyalist raiders struck Patriot farms. Patriots burned out suspected Tories. Families split. Old grievances over land, debts, and insults found new life beneath political labels. As militia colonel and state attorney, Dooley pursued loyalists with relentless zeal. He prosecuted them, confiscated property, and advocated strict punishment. Supporters saw a tireless defender of liberty. Enemies saw an arrogant, ruthless man willing to bend truth and law to achieve his goals. He accumulated foes who nursed their hatred patiently. By 1780, the British held Savannah and Augusta. Patriot resistance in Georgia's interior depended on guerrilla bands, hit-and-run raids, and determined leaders like Dooley and Clark. The backcountry simmered with constant violence. Then came the night that changed everything. A band of Tories, reportedly under Captain Corcoran, tracked Dooley to his isolated cabin. They struck under darkness. Dooley confronted them, perhaps trying to buy time for his family. Gunshots and blades did the rest. His wife and children witnessed the full horror. The killers disappeared into the night, leaving behind a widow, orphaned children, and a patriot movement stunned by the loss of one of its fiercest champions. News raced through the settlements like dry grass catching fire. Dooley had become more than an officer. He was a frontier folk hero, the man who stood defiant when British power seemed strongest. His death, especially the intimate cruelty of it, committed before his own family, was branded an atrocity. Early historian Hugh McCall, himself a Revolutionary veteran, portrayed Dooley as a martyr whose blood cried from the earth. Later writers echoed the sentiment, declaring that few men of that turbulent era deserved greater remembrance. Legend and fact braided together, as they often do when a cause needs heroes. The exact details mattered less than the power the story acquired. The response came swiftly. Patriot riders spread across the countryside, questioning witnesses, tracking movements, following rumors.
The backcountry's close-knit networks worked in both directions: informants, scouts, and men carrying grudges of their own. The responsible Tories did not remain free for long. Tradition and local memory point to a remote pond near Dooley's home, later known as Tory Pond. The captured men were brought there. In the heat of rage, there was no formal trial, no measured justice. They were hanged beside the water's edge, their bodies left as a warning. One brutal act answered another. Some versions of the story connect these same men or others from their circle to the legendary Nancy Hart. According to tradition, Hart captured a group of loyalists after they boasted of Dooley's murder inside her cabin. Holding them at gunpoint, she reportedly helped ensure they never left alive. Whether every detail is true remains uncertain, but the symbolism endured. The threads of resistance wove together. Dooley's murder became fuel for an even larger cycle of vengeance, while Nancy Hart emerged as another enduring symbol of frontier defiance. Truth and myth became so tightly intertwined that separating them risks unraveling the story itself. Yet the impact was undeniable. The hangings at Tory Pond delivered a clear warning: strike one of us, and we will answer in kind.
Dooley County would later bear John Dooley's name, a quiet tribute to a man whose violent end helped shape the state's revolutionary memory. Tory Pond retained its somber name, tying the landscape forever to its bloody past. Today, near Lincolnton and the historical markers around Elijah Clark State Park, the silence feels almost deceptive. Pine needles blanket the ground. Birds call overhead. Yet if you listen closely, the echoes remain. The crack of muskets at Kettle Creek. Desperate voices inside a darkened cabin. the creak of ropes beside still water. These were not distant generals commanding vast armies. They were ordinary men and women risking everything for a fragile vision of liberty while settling ancient scores in blood. John Dooley embodied those contradictions: patriot and prosecutor, avenger and victim, hero and deeply flawed man shaped by grief. His death did not end the fighting. It accelerated a reckoning that helped secure Georgia's frontier for the emerging nation. The scream for vengeance was never tidy or cinematic. It never fit neatly into polished textbooks or patriotic parades. It was messy, brutal, profoundly human. Yet within that chaos lived an unyielding refusal to submit. Georgia's backcountry fighters, with Dooley foremost among them in both life and legend, proved that independence would be won not only through grand strategies, but through the relentless determination of ordinary people who refused to surrender their homes. The land still remembers. The red clay guards its stories, waiting for those willing to listen. And when the wind rises once more across those lonely ridges, carrying whispers through the pines, you can almost hear it, the faint, enduring cry that once demanded payment in full. Georgia screamed, and the frontier answered.